You're at your old trusty boat. You call my tea sparrow. I'm in the city of Mardi Gras.
Welcome to the Sailing into Oblivion podcast. I'm your host, Jerome Rand. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Had a few awesome emails come through on the old news desk, so to speak, and I wanted to just address them. So that's what we're going to do today. Two of them, actually, in particular, were very interesting, and I think they are pretty good topics. I'm not an expert. I'm going to say that, a little disclaimer right away, but I do have quite a bit of experience, good and bad, which I think is very valuable on both sides. So that's what we're going to sort of get into. But before we start the show, like I always say, if you want to support the podcast, become a member of the 40-member strong Patreon family, you can head over, follow the link, to the Patreon group, and you can help keep this show going, which so many of you already are, and it's fantastic. It's super helping me out. It's making it, I like doing this podcast. It's enjoyable. I love sitting down with people, and at the same time, it's, it is a lot of work. So I do appreciate the little tip of the hat, so to speak. So that one's a big one. And then the other thing, obviously, is we've got 5 different shirts. I'm actually wearing one of the zip-up hoodies right now, and it's so soft and it's so nice. It's actually good quality. You never know when you do these internet things, and obviously it's the first time I've ever done merch, but I don't know. It's kind of cool, and I'm enjoying it. So it is pretty good quality. You can check those out. Follow the link to the bonfire stuff. I'll put that in the description as well. And then obviously you can reach out to the show at sailingintooblivion.com and click on the podcast link and just click over on the old contact the show, and bam, that email goes directly to me. And with that being said, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, I did want to mention, in other news, I guess, that I have started I received a few other emails about one of the subjects I was talking about in the last podcast, and that was sort of doing these shorter interviews with people via Zoom. Not the best quality as far as the audio goes, but I am, you get the video. So I think what I am going to do, they're already going up on YouTube. I just had a pretty cool conversation today with a Triple Crown thru hiker, and that essentially is someone who hikes the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. You could do it in a single calendar year. This guy, Eitan, he did it over multiple years, but still, literally, I looked up the stats on this. We're talking about an elevation gain of over 1 million feet. We're talking about almost 8,000 miles walked, and I think it's 22 states total. It's absolutely tremendous. I'd like to do the PCT. The CDT sort of scares me for sure, but from what I've heard from people, they usually talk about that one as the best one. So I don't know. Only about 150 people even try to do it each year, and only half of them might make it. So crazy. But in any event, let me hop out of the weeds real quick. So I've been doing these little shorts. I've got 3 of them now. I'm hopefully going to be sitting down with Randall Reeves this week and a couple other people. So I don't know. It allows me to reach a sort of different guest than anybody that's in my immediate vicinity, and I think that's pretty cool because I've got some pretty neat connections out there that I've made throughout the years, and some pretty interesting people to really talk to. They're shorter in duration, in the 20-30 minute range, so it's a little crunched compared to doing the podcast, which is kind of interesting. When you sit down for a podcast where you have no limits, if the conversation is flowing, you just let it keep going and going and going, and there's no rush, there's no push to get the content going quickly and try and hit all your bases. You just got all the time in the world. But with these things, because it's on Zoom and all that, I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm trying to keep it a little bit kept, but maybe that's good as well. So in any event, they're getting pushed out on YouTube, and I think for the Patreon group, I'm just going to go ahead and start uploading those on the Patreon page rather than sort of clip them into the podcast. I don't know if that's the greatest plan in the world. We'll see, but it's a work in progress, and I've only done 3 of them, so we've got to sort of build that library up, so to speak. But I had a great conversation the other night with Sven about the weather balloon, or the Chinese spy balloon, or whatever it was up in the sky, because Sven works in sort of that aerospace stratospheric flight sort of thing, and it was really interesting to get his take on it. That one's up on YouTube as well, so might want to check that out. But excuse me, in any event, that's sort of a new thing that's cropping up in the content world, and I don't know. We'll see how it goes. If people enjoy them, then I'll keep doing them. Like I said, I mean, with the podcast as well, it's fun. It's fun to sit down, undistracted, with another person, and basically say, yeah, turn the cell phone off, and it's just going to be us. So, I keep going. I'm just going to keep on going. It's cold out. I did talk to Murphy. For all the Murphy fans out there, he survived the bitter cold. I think it got down to about -30 or something in the boatyard the other night. He told me that he put duct tape all over the shack doors, crammed his sweatshirts and stuff like that in all the cracks, and he said the shack never got below 60 degrees. So he just wasn't, basically he couldn't open the big shed door to go outside. So, he brought a bucket in for what, and he was good. Awesome. Glad he survived. I thought to myself, I hope somebody's either going to take him in or what. He does have a couple of heaters in there, but I mean, when you're talking like -30s, that's really cold. You lose the power in that sort of situation, and you might actually be in kind of trouble. So that being said, somehow Thomas Murphy is still alive and kicking, and I talked to him today. So that's my Murphy update. Now on to the subjects. I'm gonna tackle the first one. First question came from I don't know, I better look it up. I don't want to screw this up. I love these questions too. They are great. The first one comes from Josh, and Josh was essentially asking about space on a boat. How you can ever be able to fit all the things that you need on your boat to be able to venture off into the wild blue ocean in a safe and prepared, I guess, manner. And one of the things that I used to always tell people is the only way you can have everything you need is if you tow the exact same boat with all the exact same stuff on right behind your boat. So there's no humanly way possible to have every single tool that you might need and everything you possibly could ever need on the boat. And I think in a lot of ways, rather than try and list all the crucial tools, I mean, I've always gotten away with a pretty basic set of tools. I mean, you got your tool bag with screwdrivers and, chisels and a hammer and wrenches and Allen wrenches and all that sort of stuff. And then you typically these days, everybody's got a nice little set of cordless power tools, from a Sawzall to, drills and all that sort of stuff. And, as I am now just listing off things, it really is more important to be in the right frame of mind when it comes to this. I mean, you get your standard set of tools that you're going to be able to do quite a bit of maintenance and repair with, but really just realize that for centuries, sailors have been just being able to put together and make do with what they have. And there's sort of, I don't know if there's sort of a pride in it, or it's kind of hard to describe, but it's one of those things where it shouldn't be shouldn't be worried that, oh my gosh, I might be out there and not have the one perfect tool. It's more of know the feeling of, I got these tools and I can pretty much do whatever I'm going to need to do with them, even if I don't have the perfect one. And sometimes, you find yourself actually manufacturing tools or manipulating them into whatever you need them to actually do. And I think when it comes to the tools, one of the big things is making sure that you've got sort of the proper stuff to be able to change the oil filters, mostly do the engine work, change belts, adjust things, all that sort of stuff. When it comes to the actual rest of the boat, I mean, it's rare that I'm out there being like, oh, I wish I would have, brought that one socket set or something like that. It's typically like, okay, well, we don't have exactly what I need for this. I'm trying to think of examples as I'm talking here, and it's sort of scrambling my brain a little bit. But I think the essence of the whole thing is that you get a pretty decent standard set of tools. Whatever you have that, you allocate a certain amount of area of stowage on your boat. Like, okay, I got that one locker. That's my tool locker. That's what I'm going to put in. Because, I have tons of those sort of, I don't know, I guess they look like what you would have, like fishing lures and stuff like that, in little separated little boxes so that you can put different types of screws and bolts and washers and all that sort of stuff. That's where I sort of get tripped up a little bit, because I know on my boat I have stuff that I'm never going to use. I did get rid of all these crazy like bronze fittings and stuff that I knew I would never need. But I keep around quite a bit of sort of oddball stuff, because in that same sense of things, you never know when you might possibly need that gigantic like 16-inch bolt or something like that. And some of these things do, oddly enough, come in handy. But having 6 different size pipe wrenches or things like that, it can get a little bit out of hand pretty quickly. So I think really when it comes to Sparrow and heading out for months at a time, I'm really looking to, have a pretty wide array of tools and power tools, and then being able to know that, yeah, I mean, if I don't have the exact right one, I'm still going to be able to come up with some way to fix that one thing or unscrew that one thing. Because, I mean, let's face it, sailboats are typically not super complicated. And if you got wrenches and screwdrivers and chisels and hammers, you're going to be able to do just about anything on that boat that you need to do. So I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't think it's great to get overwhelmed with the thinking that I need every single last little thing, so that if every last little thing goes wrong, I'm able to fix it properly and perfectly. I mean, we're sailors. We go out there, we make do with what we've got. And, if all goes terrible, what is it? I think it's, somebody sent me a quote, or maybe it was in a comment or something, but it was something I think John Kretschmer had said, where if something breaks on the boat and you can't fix it, he likes to think of like why he actually needed it in the first place. So it's essentially like if you're using some little thing on the boat and it keeps breaking, you sort of step back and be like, well, do I actually need that thing on this boat? And chances are you might find that, oh, actually you don't really need that. And if it keeps breaking, it's actually not working anyway. So you might need just something else. But I think it also bleeds in from tools to like spare parts and things. That's a big one of like, well, I got to have a spare alternator. I want to have a spare inverter. I need spare this. I need spare that. And again, it's one of those things you're never going to be able to have all the spares you need unless you bring a spare boat with you. And so you sort of have to, I don't know, just basically prioritize according to the space that you have on the boat. But don't go overly crazy. I mean, think about it. If you decide you don't have enough space for a starter motor, let's say a spare one on your boat, and you get out there and you burn out the starter motor somehow, and now you can't start the engine. Well, you at least still have the sails and you're still able to move the boat, and you just have to sail to a place where you can then get one and replace it. It's not the end of the world and everything stops. It's more of just like, oh, okay, so now we don't have that. I mean, on this last trip, started out with all the solar panel. I had free energy, electricity flowing from the sky, and it got all taken away from me, and I did not have an extra spare. Normally I do, but on this trip I definitely didn't. And, it's one of those things where you just make do with what you have, and you go from there. And you can take that to the nth degree as well. I mean, had I not had enough fuel, then, the electricity completely goes out. Then we're talking about the true backups, because I do think that it's worthwhile on ocean passages and things like that, where you're going to be out at sea for weeks at a time, to be able to still navigate the boat safely via no electricity, none at all. So we're talking charts, we're talking compasses, we're talking sextant. And I think it's, that's probably better than piling on 50 replacements of this, that, and that, the other thing, to ensure that your electricity stays on. I think it's better to, kind of have decent amount of spare parts for each system, not go overboard, but always be prepared for that system to completely fail. Because let's face it, we're headed out into an environment that wants to eat everything that's out there. So the ocean is slowly degrading the boat. It's absolutely attacking all electronics. And, that's the world that we're going out into. And that's why we only go out there for certain periods of time and then come back in and spend our life savings trying to fix the boat back up, and in the hopes that we can head back out again for some crazy sadistic reason that none of us seem to be able to figure out. But I don't know. Hopefully, Josh, that sort of gives you a little bit of insight. I know it's there's no real great answer for it, and I wish I could put together a list. Maybe at some point when I get back to the boat, I can lay out all the tools which desperately need a good WD-40 washing. I guess that's not the best word, but they need a little bit of TLC, let's say that. And maybe I'll do just a quick video of like, yeah, these are the tools that I've always had on the boat, and it's not a huge amount by any means. It's not overkill. I don't have multiple drills and multiple this. I think with the power tools, it's really mostly about having multiple batteries, because I've always found that sometimes those lithium ion batteries, they just fail on you out of nowhere. And then you're sort of like, I only got one battery. So that's one top tip, I'd say. Get a lot of batteries for your power tools. That's a good idea. But yeah, other than that, I mean, it's really the basics go a long way, and you'd be amazed at what you can manage and make happen. Now, he did say Josh had thrown books in there as well. And books are kind of one of those things where I cherish them. I have an old Kindle that someone gave me that's fantastic. It's got hundreds and hundreds of books on it, and they're great because obviously the batteries last for a long time and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know, for my money, I love the feel of a good old used book in my hand, and so I bring quite a few on every voyage. That being said, I'm not gonna, take up room over in the food station or anything like that. The cupboards, everything gets allotted its little amount, and that's up to the sailor. That's up to each person and each boat, what you're going to allot, and how long you're going to be out there and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty common for me after a trip to get back, and I'm sort of like pulling things out of the closet, or even I find books that are like crammed in to some of the cupboards that are in the head or under the bunk, just random ones. And I almost plant those away as sort of little treasures that hopefully become forgotten and then discovered after months and months at sea, because there is nothing better than that when you find something that you forgot about and you're like, oh my gosh, holy cow. I still remember there was one time where I don't know which trip it was on, but there was, I usually, as far as the alcohol goes, I typically buy pretty crummy, low shelf stuff, but I'll always throw a few smaller bottles of like good stuff on there, Kettle One, or maybe a little, some type of scotch and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes people gift it to me before I leave, which is always pretty cool. But I can remember being out of alcohol, and again, it's just for a sundowner, but weeks and stuff went by, and then I do remember surfing through something, and I found, I want to say it was a bottle of Mount Gay rum. I can't be sure. It's either that or it was Jack Daniels. I don't know. But either way, it was one of the most welcome surprises that I've ever had on the boat. And that was pretty fantastic. Like literally shouting to the sky, like, woo, I can't believe it. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, you got to prioritize. You got to take a look and see what you want the most of, the amount of space you have, but definitely don't get overwhelmed with the fact that you're not going to be able to take everything, but you are going to be able to figure out how to do the things you need to do on the boat with what you have. So there's a happy medium between super basic and way too much, and you just got to find that little area and not get too caught up. I mean, if the engine is your big concern, focus on that. Make sure you have all the tools you need to be able to do whatever you have to on that. If it's more, rigging and all that, well, then punch into that and make that the priority. So hopefully, Josh, that helps. I don't know if it will or not, but that's my 2 cents on that. Now, the other big question I have, and thank you, Josh, for sending that in. I really do appreciate that. Let's see. Gotta find the email. Where are we? Dun, 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 dun. Oh, man. Chris. Yes. Okay. So it's Chris, I believe, isn't it? Dun, dun, dun. Man, I tell you, I do. There's part of me that thinks that my brain might have gotten a little scrambled when I had that head hit out on this last trip, because math has seemingly gotten kind of hard, harder than it used to be, and the brain seems a little more scrambled lately. Maybe it's just me getting old. I don't know. Could be, but. For some reason, I'm kind of like, holy smokes. All right, yeah, it's Christopher. All right, so the question here is, he has a boat. I think it's a 30-foot Sabre, I want to say, and he wants to get more experience. And I've heard this question from quite a few people. I want more experience. How do I get more experience? I want blue water experience, or I just want more time on the ocean, but I don't have enough experience to go out there by myself, and I don't want to captain my own boat with other people on it, which is smart, very, very smart. And because the minute you delve into being responsible and being in that position as a captain, and other people's lives are essentially in your hands, you do have to take that very, very seriously. And to sort of, I don't know, have a little too much bravado and be like, oh, I can handle it, it'll be totally fine, is not a wise way to go. You really do have to consider that fact. And so it's sort of a concern of like, well, how do you get experience? And, there are many different options. And again, I'm only going to be able to speak really on my own experiences trying to break into the whole ocean sailing world scene. I was doing it for essentially a career. I basically wanted to get into yacht deliveries. That was the dream job as soon as I discovered or realized that it was something that could actually be done. And, I went from essentially not doing any ocean sailing to crewing on people's boats. And, there's some pitfalls, some pros and cons when it comes to that, because, back then, and this would have been early 2000s, I would cruise through the internet. I would get jobs through word of mouth. But essentially, I'm flying to a place to hop on a boat with a bunch of people that I don't know the boat either. And then we just set off to sea and go from point A to point B. And I was very lucky that every one of them so far has been fairly uneventful. There's been a few dangerous ones in the past for sure, but I've never ended up in a life raft, which is great, and I've never ended up in crazy fist fights or arguments or anything like that with the people that I've been able to sail with. So I guess I'm kind of lucky there. But I've definitely heard the stories. I've had friends that have been dropped off on islands and all that sort of stuff. Populated islands, not deserted ones. It wasn't crazy like that, but I guess let's attack the first one, the internet. The internet's a crazy place. You never know what you're going to get. Typically, there is sort of a thinking that I used to have back in the day, and I still don't know. I haven't taken a delivery job in a long time, many years now. But there was a saying of like, if a captain or a boat owner needs to resort to going to the internet to find crew, that in itself can possibly, not always, but can possibly be sort of a red flag of like, well, how come this person can't find crew or doesn't know people that want to go out there with them, or her for that matter? And it's, I don't think it's a huge red flag by any means, but it's something to sort of consider. The other thing is the anonymity that the internet sort of provides. Because sometimes, you're signing on. Let's say you're sitting in Michigan and you are signing on for a trip from Newport down to the British Virgin Islands. You're going to basically agree to this thing. You're going to fly out there. You're going to see the boat, meet the people, and then you're going to go. It doesn't 100% mean you have to go. If you get there and you have some pretty sneaking suspicions or things just don't seem up to snuff, it's not like, you are absolutely committed. Nobody's going to force you onto that boat. So as crummy as that would be to get out there and then be like, wow, this boat is really looking rough and I don't trust it. And, it's going to possibly be a rough passage. Yeah, those are things that you may have to pull the trigger and bite the bullet and be like, you know what, I'll pay for that flight out and back. Sorry, I am not going with you. So, the internet can make it, it can make it a little easier to be a bit deceiving and almost get you into like what you possibly could consider being like a trap in some way, shape, or form. But I think in a lot of ways, the way I would tackle that is not, you might discover a yacht delivery on the internet, and let's say it's an unpaid position, but they pay for travel. Before I'm ever going to accept the offer or actually sign on as a crew member, I'm going to, leave the internet behind and get the person on the phone, maybe even do a Zoom chat these days just to really get some FaceTime, get to know the person, and talk to them for like half an hour or something like that. So at least you can get a little bit more information on not only the boat, but the captain as well, because, hey, a little bit of extra time spent sort of vetting everything in the situation is definitely going to be a smart thing to do. And if you just, lo and behold, leave it up to, some keystrokes and an email address, then you might be in for some pretty big surprises. Now, having said that, I've done quite a few just off the internet, but I pretty much, if I recall with my old scratchy brain, I always made sure to talk on the phone with any captain or owner that I was signing on with, and then got a little bit of history, not only on who was the captain, but also on the boat. And the big question for me typically was, have you and has the boat done this voyage before? And how many times have they done it? That was always sort of a good indicator, because it's kind of, I don't know, I just feel like people aren't going to really lie about that. If you just say, well, does the boat have a lot of blue water experience because we're sailing to Bermuda, they could consider blue water experience. That leaves it open for a little bit of exaggeration. But if you say, yeah, has the boat sailed from here to Bermuda before? That's kind of a yes or no question, or a yes or no answer. So that's something that can sort of be kept in mind. Now, sort of switching gears over to what I find to be more, not guaranteed, but just less red flaggy, if that's even a thing, sort of trips, trying to configure them. It's going to be through like word of mouth, where somebody in the marina heard that his buddy's taking their boat, from point A to point B, and they're looking for crew. And so it's all through word of mouth. And then you actually have a little bit of vetting right there, because you'd be like, well, what's this guy's job? What's his deal? And so you get sort of the inside information there. So I've always felt like that's just an extra level, but you're still going to do the same thing of talking to the person, finding out about the boat, finding out about the captain's experience, what their game plan is. I mean, one of the other questions I always like to ask is, what kind of watch system do you plan on running? And because I've been on boats where the owner says, oh, we're not going to do watches, and we're on like a 6-day trip. And I'm thinking to myself, we're not going to do watches. What does that mean? Does that mean literally I'm going to be sailing the boat all night long because you say you can't sleep during the day? Because I've been in that situation before, and that's exhausting, doing like an 8-hour watch all through the night. And then I'm trying to get a little snooze time during the day, and they're out fishing and doing all this sort of stuff because they've gotten 8 hours of sleep. It was a bad situation. I don't want to get into like specifics and things like that, but that was kind of a nightmare. So knowing, some of the basic stuff, and obviously I think on that same note, when you do get to a boat, it's always pretty good indication of, I guess, not the qualifications of the captain, because I don't put a lot of trust in that. I'm not going to lie. If somebody's like, well, I got 100-ton, that doesn't mean anything to me. And it shouldn't mean anything to anybody except for if they know how to pass an exam with a lot of questions on it. If you say, well, hey, what sort of experience do you have? How many miles have you done? Tell me about some of your previous passages. That, I think, has more merit than just a little piece of paper. So that's just a little caveat there. And I mean, no offense to anybody that's very proud of their captain's licenses. I know I am of my Yachtmaster Offshore. It's awesome. It was a lot of work to get it. And I know it's a lot of work to get any captain's license, but all I'm saying is you can't count on that as being something that is proof positive that a captain's license does not equate directly to seamanship by any means, any way, shape, or form. Anybody that says it does, they're crazy. So I'm putting a stamp on that one. I'm getting heated. I might have to unzip my hoodie, my Sailing into Oblivion hoodie. It's so hot and soft and lovely. Okay, not off into the weeds. I'm trying to stay on track here. It's unscripted. So you get that level of sort of security when you have the word of mouth or the reference sort of thing to get onto a boat. Now, if we're talking about trying to gain experience, one of the things, the idea of like, oh, dude, I want to go on a transatlantic, 3-weeker from Florida all the way over to Gibraltar and all that sort of stuff. That's all well and good. But if you haven't even done a two or 3 night, like overnight passage, you got to start there. Don't jump too far into the deep end, because you might find that you suffer from massive seasickness and vertigo the minute you get into a big enough swell. You might find that you hate it. You might find that, it's just the most awful experience in the world. And it's going to be a whole lot better if you find that out on a 3-day passage rather than a 3-week passage. So my advice on that would just be to start out small and work your way up. Kind of the cool thing about the sailing community being so tight-knit and small is that if you hop onto a boat and you do like a 3-day passage and it goes really well and you get along with the people and you learn stuff on the boat, and everybody sort of gets along, then you get to the place and guess what? You might get referred for another trip, a bigger trip, bigger boat, who knows, whatever you're sort of looking for. But conversely, and the same thing is if, you get on a boat and turn into Mr. Krabby Crab, or you're a lay down Larry, or you're just not pulling your own weight, as they would say, that gets around as well. And, so you do have to, there's a pretty concerted effort. And I know I always made it I actually am far more lazy when I'm a solo sailor than when I'm on a boat with other people. Because when I'm on a boat with other people, I know that, a little bit of reputation's at stake. And if you're not sort of living up to the expectations, it gets around. As a solo sailor, all I have to do is deal with my own brain, and I can be as lazy or as dirty or whatever. But when you're with other people, you do have to consider that and everything. So that's sort of something that has to be thought of. But yeah, essentially, you get the word of mouth, and those are pretty good. And the best one would be one where you don't have to travel to it. Let's say it's in your local marina. You get to know the person. You can actually get out and get like a day sail on the boat. It's rare because most people don't want to take their boats out and then bring them back in and all that stuff just for a day sail, just to appease a cruise member, a potential crew member. But at the same time, if you can do that, do a shakedown cruise or something like that, oh man, that's great, because then you get to actually see not only the boat in action, but the captain or the owner in action, and see how they deal with that. Because most people, if they're what I would consider to be like a stressed out sailor, like just a little bit overwhelmed and not super crazy confident, it shows from the minute you start untying from the dock to actually setting sail to popping in a reef to any of that sort of stuff. And the ocean is really good at exposing that sort of stuff. And so that would probably be one of the best things that you could do if you're trying to make sure you are getting on a boat that's a good boat with a decent captain, and it's going to keep you safe while you try and gain this experience. Because really that's what it comes down to, is that you're in a position where you don't have the knowledge, you're seeking the knowledge, you're trying to get that and develop these skills, and you're actually having to sort of put your life in somebody else's hands. So it is, it's one of those things you do have to, you can't take it too lightly. Now, on the flip side of that as well, sailing is always, venturing out to sea is always going to be a little bit of a roll of the dice. It's a little bit of an adventure. There is a risk. There is a danger element, which is part of what makes it so cool. I think, a little like, whoo, ho, we're going out there. Anytime you turn yourself over to Mother Nature like that, especially out at sea, because your whole world is ruled by the wind and waves, there's a potential for things to go really bad. And that is part of the risk, but it's also part of the reward, because when you do go out there and you do come back, which 99.9% of boats do, then hey, you know what? You feel pretty darn good and your confidence is sort of boosted up. But you do have to realize that, we're going to take a little bit of a risk doing this. And if it's one of those things where that risk makes you so uncomfortable that you want to wrap your whole self in 15 life jackets, bubble wrap, 15 EPIRBs, and all that sort of stuff, and just wear a life raft as a backpack, sailing offshore might not be for you. And I don't mean that. I'm not trying to like make fun of anybody or anything like that, but I'm just trying to be real that there's a point at which you have to realize that you're going out into this environment that we're not supposed to be able to be there. That's why we have to have boats to protect us from, the ocean, because we wouldn't survive more than, a few hours swimming around out there. And, we're putting a lot of our faith in that equipment to be able to be out there. So that's definitely one of the things to think of. Now, switching gears a little bit as we're creeping up in the time here. There is something to be said, I think, just a quick note on the whole money thing, because there is the other option, and that is to get on as you can basically pay for these passages. Guys like John Kretschmer, Skip Novak, they are out there and they do big trips in dangerous waters. I don't think all the time, but Skip Novak's thing is down near Cape Horn. John does, I'm not sure what he does currently, but I know in the past he used to do transatlantics in the wintertime and all that stuff, which still boggles my mind. I went across from Antigua to Turkey in February one year, many, many years ago. And holy smokes, we saw some of the biggest swell I've ever seen in my life out there. We were in a 100-foot boat, so it wasn't, too crazy, but it was like, holy cow. And he loves it. He loves that stuff. At least that's what I take from when I read his books and listen to some of his webinars and stuff. It's absolutely crazy. But you can. It costs a lot of money. This is one where you're paying to earn that experience. And obviously, I mean, I've said it before. I think John is the greatest American sailing captain alive today. I just, the fact his experience level is so insanely varied and just huge, not only of dealing with different weather, but also of just different boats and all that sort of stuff. I mean, he's hats off to him. One day I'm going to have him on the podcast. Next time I go to Florida, I'm going to see if he's in Fort Lauderdale and just drive on down, because that would be a wonderful, wonderful conversation. But yeah, I mean, you're going to learn a whole lot of stuff off that for sure. I don't know too much about any of the programs, so I don't want to speak too highly or negatively or anything like that on any of them. But the option is there. If you've got the money to do it, that's a great way to get out there and do it. But if you don't, signing up and trying to just get on a delivery where they pay for just your transportation and that's it, it's not a paid position, is a great way to go ahead and get some of that experience. Talk to me 20 years ago when I was first getting into it. I used to get so mad at people that took crew positions for free, because it was sort of hurting the industry of all the other ones of us that were like, I've got a little bit of experience and I can't take a non-paying job because this is what I do. I'm trying to make a living as a delivery crew to build up to a skipper and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know, it was funny because the transition from 2000 onward, you just saw more and more people willing to go for free. And it sort of diluted the crew pool, so to speak, out there, and made it more and more difficult to actually find paying gigs and all that sort of stuff. And I can remember a time where you used to be able to go down to Antigua's race week down at the end of April, and you're almost guaranteed to find a position that paid $100 a day, go across the Atlantic on usually a pretty sweet boat. And man, I miss those days. Those days were pretty cool. And it wasn't all the time. It depended on the boat and all that sort of stuff. But you'd be amazed what you can find out there. That's for sure. It's this really amazing system of, I guess, apprenticeship, so to speak, where the wise old captain, takes on the noobs, and the noobs go out and he puts them through their paces and they learn the stuff, and then as you gain that experience, then all of a sudden now you've got the confidence and you start going out on your own, and then enough years pass and you're the salty old sailor and you take the new noobs and you teach them stuff, put them through their paces, and the cycle continues as it has for hundreds of years. So it is pretty cool. But yeah, I think really to sort of wrap it up and just recap some of the points. And, again, like I said, I'm not an expert on this. I just have some experience. It really is, try to vet the captain or owner, try and vet the boat before you get out there, get them on the phone. Don't just stroke the keys on the old computer. Try and get some voice or FaceTime in before you set sail. Start out small, work your way bigger. Remember, you got to build your reputation a bit. Always try and go above and beyond when you're out there, because remember, you're dealing with people stuck on a tiny boat and they have to be around each other. So a little bit of etiquette, a little bit of extra oomph, not leaving dishes in the sink and things like that. That goes a long way. Absolutely goes a long way. But yeah, hopefully that sort of wraps things up as far as a little bit of information for you, Chris. I don't know. It's one of those things where in the end, you just got to jump out there and sign on and go for it. And, the odds are very much in your favor that you're going to go out, you're going to have some experiences, good and bad, and you're going to come back a more experienced person. But you're going to come back, and then you can do another one and another one, and you gain your experience that way. It really is the chances of going out there and being hit by a force 10 gale and losing the mast and all that sort of stuff, they're pretty rare. I mean, I almost kind of feel bad with this last voyage and putting all that content together, because this was one of the first voyages where I actually tried to tell the whole story via a video camera. How old am I? A video camera. A GoPro. And I don't know. I've gotten some strange reactions from people that I think that was one of my first trips or something. But I wouldn't want to have it sort of scare people off from being like, oh, geez, well, look what happened to him out there. He got turned over and broke his boat and this, that, and the other thing. And it really isn't, it's rare. I mean, in that case alone, we're talking one wave that took us all the way over out of nearly 70,000 miles sailed on that boat. So those are still pretty darn good odds. We're getting up into lottery territory there, I think. So, but before I go, I do want to maybe throw in a cautionary tale. So a full-on experience of a delivery that did not go well, and then maybe a mid-grade one, and then maybe one of the greatest deliveries I've ever done. So we will be right back after this short break. All right, and we are back from our break. So story time. Let's just, let's start with the medium delivery. And I think the lessons learned in this one, for me, were really that you never know what's going to happen as far as the other people that you're sort of signing on to go out with. And as much as you like to be able to vet people 100% and really know they're going to be rock solid, you're never really going to know until you get out there, and by then it's too late. But we were taking a boat from the Caribbean, and I'm going to try and keep this as vague as possible when it comes to the details, just because I don't want I would hate for anybody to feel like I'm talking about them or anything. But essentially, we were going from the Caribbean, and then we were going to make our way back to the East Coast with one stop along the way. It was going to be all blue water sailing, and we had a pretty fully crewed up boat. There was the owner, captain, and then 4 of us mighty crew members to take it. And it was probably in the high 40-foot range, older sailboat, but very well built. And so the trust in the boat was there. And for me at the time, and still I guess today, I always kind of had a bit of a cocksure attitude. probably more hubris than anything at this point when I think about it, that, no matter what happens with all the other people, I'm still going to be able to sail this boat wherever I need to sail it, sort of attitude. And I think in some ways that can be a good thing, but you can also find yourself getting into some trouble. But in any event, with this trip, we took off, and within a day, the person in charge, the captain, the owner, found himself with pretty severe vertigo and seasickness, and basically was out of the game. So at that point, the rest of us were essentially left in charge 24/7 to, keep the boat sailing to its next destination, the first little stopover, which was like 7 days out. And quickly we sort of found out that, there was not a huge amount of experience amongst some of the other crew. And so it just became a voyage where when I was on watch, we were sort of in control. We were doing our thing. When I was off watch, then I was basically on call for whenever anything had to happen. And it just made it so that the voyage was one where it was almost very similar to being a solo sailor, where, if something needs doing, if reefs need to be put in, if courses need to be changed, if weather is changing, then that means I'm coming up on deck, whether I'm on watch or not, and sort of helping to dealing with the situation on my own. And none of the people on this trip were mean or snidey or anything like that about any of this sort of stuff. So it was one of those things where I had two options. I could either be all mad and angry about it, or I could step up to the plate, take the high road, and help out as much as I could, make sure it's run safely, and help as much as can, and I think that's I don't know where that thinking came from. I wish I did, then I would tap into it all the time, but that was just sort of how it went, and it paid off in the end because the owner, when the boat finally did make it back, because the owner ended up flying from the stopover back home, and then we brought the boat all the way back. It was a big thank you in the end, which is fantastic. That's what you want, is sort of that situation where the people that hired you on are very excited, very happy with it, and that's where the whole reputation thing goes out. But it was one of those things where you sort of sign on for this trip, and you're thinking, oh, okay, cool, man, we'll do 3 on, 6 off. It's going to be a nice trip. It's a nice boat. And then you find that actually you're going to be pretty much doing a lot of stuff the whole time. And there's not going to be a whole lot of rest for the weary, so to speak. And yeah, like I said, it was only a week to the first stop and then 5 days or so to the next. And so it wasn't like this huge long 2-month trip or anything in that situation, because I know that would probably start grinding on my gears a little bit if, I had to come on deck every single time we had to do something that said person should probably be able to do. But, over a week or two, not a big deal. I can handle it, get off there. And then, they might know that I've got a good attitude, or I'm, ready to do whatever it takes. But it also, gives me a little information on the people and on the whole program and everything. And then, the next time you get called up, you might be like, I got another boat I got to go to. But you're still going to get those recommendations and stuff. So that's definitely a good thing. Now on to the bad. So my brother Adam and I, we were amongst many stints down in Fort Lauderdale, living in crew houses, trying to find work on boats, basically trying to sort things out, I guess, in our younger days, in our 20s. And we've been down there, not a whole lot of day work, all that sort of stuff, cleaning some engine rooms, doing some washdowns, not the greatest stuff for somebody who wants to get out there and actually sail. And, but you gotta cut your teeth somewhere, and essentially signed on to do an unpaid passage because it was going to the British Virgin Islands, where we had worked previously, and we had a lot of friends, and I had a job interview if I could get down there. And so, it was one of those things where transportation was paid to get back, so it wasn't going to cost us anything. All the food, everything was included, but it wasn't going to be a paying gig. And there were going to be three of us, my brother and I, and then the captain. And it was on basically a production boat, a newer boat, and not what I would consider to be a blue water boat. It was a catamaran in the 30-foot range, and just not something that really needed to be off of, let's say a big lake. Not really an ocean passage machine. But the plan was to go and sail from Florida through the Bahamas, through the Turks and Caicos, and then just make the hop down to the Caribbean. And it just, I don't know, when I think about it, we had met with the captain, we'd had lunch with him, and then we actually moved on board the boat for a few days before preparations, or to help with preparations, and then we took off. So we had more than enough time to vet this whole system, and we both sort of knew and noticed lots of red flags, just lots of them. There was no tools. There weren't any charts. The game plan was not what I typically would think of as the safest, fastest route to get down there. One, we're in a catamaran, and the plan was to go through the Bahamas. And there's two ways of thinking on that. One, you've got the shelter of the islands, but the other way is that you're going to be beating into the wind the whole time. And we're on a catamaran. It's not good. It's just not. It's not acceptable to be doing that if you don't have to. And, I had done, tons of deliveries at this point from the East Coast down to the Caribbean, where you go out to I-65, aka the longitude 65, and then you turn right and go to the Caribbean. So you're pretty much reaching almost the whole way down, but you do have to go pretty far out. You're way out there. You're in Bermuda territory, so to speak, and then you make your turn. And that does make some people nervous. I understand that. Not so much me, but like this we considered doing it when we talked about the passage plan and passage making, but because I was not the captain at the time, it was not up to me, and we decided not to do that and to go through the Bahamas. And I honestly, at first, I was discouraged because I thought, oh man, we're just gonna beat into this the whole way. But then I realized, we're probably gonna be stopping in a few places in the Bahamas, and I hadn't ever been there before, so kind of sounded like it would be kind of cool. And in any event, as the trip went on, a couple things became very apparent. One was that the sailing experience was not there out of our captain. He definitely did not really have the nuances. He was more of a powerboat person. Sausalito, California. Oh, I wonder who that is. Oh, man, I forgot I was even doing this podcast. My phone starts beeping. Sorry about that. I'll have to see if I can edit that one out. But essentially, yeah, he was a powerboat guy, so he didn't really know too much, so we sort of had to help him through that. And, when you're doing solo watches, if the person who's up there doesn't really have a huge handle on what's going on, then it's always a little bit... You're on edge when you go down below, at least when the weather's not great. And the other thing was that the boat was falling to pieces. The auto helm broke. The water tanks broke free. The hatches started to leak. Anytime we got into any sort of ugly weather, the whole thing's flexing and making sounds, and it's pretty awful. We only had one chart. We had literally, we're talking a screwdriver, an adjustable wrench, and a hammer, I think. That was about all we had for tools. So there wasn't really a whole lot of anything we do. And these were all huge red flags, and we went anyway. And we continued even after we had made a few stops along the way. And it was one of those things. I was young, I was dumb, I was desperate. I wanted to get down there. Florida wasn't all that great at that time. And it was just one of those things. But then we take off to go do the final stretch. This was a trip where there was no alcohol or anything like that. So we didn't really have to worry about that situation. Although whenever we were in port, that got pretty ugly. I'm not really going to address too much of that because it was on land. But there were just, a lot of these red flags. But in any event, we stayed on and we took off. And when we got down to go across the Mona Passage, which if my mind recalls is between Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, or it's Puerto Rico. I can't even remember. But in any event, we're in that area, and it is getting ugly. Not gale force, but pretty darn close. We're in this catamaran. The waves are getting big. It's getting sketchy, rainy, all that sort of stuff. Bad visibility. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of systems on this boat. There's no AIS. We're essentially the navigation. I'm keeping track of the navigation with the paper chart. We don't have a sextant. The captain had his computer with a program on it, and I had my backup little handheld GPS. So at least I knew, like, okay, I'm solid. At least I have a chart, and I have this little GPS, this little Garmin thing. So we've got that. But yeah, it got pretty bad. We ended up really banging that boat up in that weather. And then we finally pulled into the Caribbean, into the Virgin Islands, and holy smokes. I don't think I've ever been more happy to be finished. And we pulled into the U.S. Virgin Islands first, and then had to actually deliver the boat into a charter fleet into the BVI. And oh my gosh, I will never forget this. So the BVI has like 5 different places that you can check in through customs. And the one place you don't want to do that is in Road Town, in the capital city there. It's just, it's almost guaranteed that they're going to look at your boat. They're going to search your boat. It's not a guarantee, but depending on how you handle yourself in there. And as much as you might be excited to see other people after being out at sea for a while, or, you might be the nicest, most funny, positive person, when you go into customs in another country, you just bite your tongue. You say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. And you just get on with it. You sign the stuff. You don't joke. And this guy went in, and I guarantee he was joking around. And this boat had a whole bunch of also like pamphlets and things like that, boxes full of stuff that was supposed to be delivered to this charter company. And all I see is them marching out with the captain, coming out to go and look through the boat. And they get on there, and their first question is, what's in these boxes? And I say, I have no idea. And boom. And he said he had no idea. I mean, it was, it was a catastrophe. Cut to 2.5 hours later, they yank all these boxes off. Those go get held for a while, and I'm sure the charter company had to pay some fines and penalties. And essentially, it was such a nightmare. But that was one of the times where I saw my younger brother reach his breaking point when, in the end, the boat was being taken care of and cleaned, and we were supposed to just sort of hang loose in case they needed our help with anything. And finally he just looks at me, he's like, you know what? I'm gone. I am gone. And the best part, just before that, we were having lunch or something like that, all 3 of us, and the captain had said, hey, do you want that chart? Because I made him buy the chart. And I was like, oh man, that'd be awesome. A little keepsake. He's like, yeah, you just give me $40 and it's all yours. And I look at him, I'm just thinking to myself, dude, you'd have been long gone out there in that storm if we hadn't been on this boat with you. Oh, and I'm not trying to say that I'm some great person or whatever, but it was just one of those situations where there was just no thanks. There was no thanks at all. And I don't know. That was a big, big nightmare trip. And I'm really glad I went on it because it taught me so many lessons that are so deeply fried into the back of my memory. But it was super dangerous. By far most dangerous trip I've ever been on. Most probability that we would have actually lost that boat if the hulls were literally cracking free around their bulkheads and stuff. And it was really bad. So word to the wise on that one. And I would love to call out the manufacturer of that boat, but I won't because I don't think that's fair to them. I think it was more just that boat just didn't need to be out there. You don't take a go-kart to the Indy 500. Let's just say that. Now on to the greatest delivery I have ever done. And it just happened to be the first transatlantic. So this one was found through the internet. I had not, and this is very, very early in my sailing career, I had not done anything more than, I believe I talked to the captain on the phone for at least like 15 minutes after I had sort of found this site and stuff. And this one was an unpaid position. They paid for the travel to the Caribbean and then back from Palma on Mallorca in the Mediterranean. But it was the captain was actually an ocean master instructor, huge amount of experience. He was just absolutely epic. He was this British guy. He looked like Dudley Moore, like almost twins. Great attitude, all this sort of stuff. We had a crew. There was, 5 of us crew. And then he would be in sort of a hover position. And there was a couple, myself, another guy, and then the captain. And the couple, the girl she had signed on to be the cook. And so we take off from Antigua, and it's pretty rough passage. It was in May, right after the Classic Regatta, and everybody is seasick, except for myself and the captain. And it was one of those situations where it was just rough enough the whole freaking time out to the Azores, 2,200 miles, where, everybody was pretty worn out, except for the captain and I. And that gave us the chance to sort of sit down. And every time I was on watch, he seemed to want to come up and tell old war stories about sailing and talk about the olden days of sailing and all that sort of stuff. And, after a few days, we get to know each other even more. And then out comes, a little bottle of whiskey or whatever. And we'd have a cocktail whenever I was on watch. And that sort of relaxes you a little bit more. And as the trip went on and on, we just became more and more friendly as far as just enjoying each other's company. And then one cocktail turned into 2 cocktails during most watches. And I like to say we left a trail of bottles behind across the Atlantic on that one. And it was phenomenal. I learned so much. I mean, this captain was phenomenal when it came to if I was doing something wrong with the boat, like if the weather picked up and I, shortened the side, and this was a like 68-foot sailboat and everything's hydraulic. So I'm learning all that. But he actually taught me a lot about sailing the boat. And, I would have the main pretty well reefed down, the wind's up, and I've got a little bit of jib. And he would come up and be like, you feel how the boat's sort of yawing around a bit. He's like, pack that jib away. Let's pull the staysail out. We keep those sails right in the center. I'm learning all these things. And it was just a really, really phenomenal. I keep saying that word. I don't know why, but it was a great experience, and it was fun, and it was casual. The only thing that would have made it better is if I was getting paid. But in the end, they actually offered me a position on the boat because it was going to be a charter boat in the Med. Now that was sort of their MO with that boat, was to basically spend the winter in the Caribbean chartering it out. And then they would go over to the Med for the summer and charter it out there, and they do that ocean crossing. And a lot of times the captain actually had people that would pay to do the crossing, much like Kretschmer and stuff, where he's going to teach you everything from celestial navigation to seamanship while you go across. So he was already in that position. I just really lucked out that I had sort of stumbled onto this boat, but that was definitely one of the greatest sailing trips with other people I've ever had in my life. It was just fantastic. I loved every minute of it, and I would do it over and over and over again because it was an awesome, fast boat. It treated us well, and we had great people on board. And after we left the Azores and things calmed down, everybody else sort of stopped with the seasickness stuff, and we were definitely all a pretty good team. We all got along really well, and I know if I ran into any of those people today, we'd go have a beer and have some good stories to tell. So you never know what you're going to get. You might get danger. You might get you're in charge. You might get the best trip of your life. But I will tell you, if you don't actually make the leap and take the gamble and roll the dice, you're never going to know. So, Chris, I want to thank you very, very much for sending in that question and trying to pick my brain on that one. And hopefully some of this was helpful. I mean, I sort of kind of think it's a little bit of a rambling podcast, but at least it had sort of a little bit of direction. I don't know. We'll have to see. Thank you all for listening. Thank you so much for the support. And until next time.